This time on Poll Hub, Ukraine has been in the headlines for the past week. Again, very big way, but it's now been more than a decade since Russia invaded and annexed Crimea. How has American public opinion changed over this very long period? We are looking at the trends. Then, do you ever get the feeling that there's just not enough time in the day? And maybe you're like me. You always have that feeling. Well, it's a thing, and it's called time poverty, and it's way more complicated than it seems. We're talking with the expert who coined the phrase to figure out, is there a way to get more time? Finally, a super fun fact from a friend of the podcast, and it involves stuffed animals. This is one you might want to check out on Instagram so you can actually see what we're talking about. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Depper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
I'm Mary Griffith.
And I'm Lee Marigal.
It's a little hard to believe, but it has been more than a decade since Russia invaded Crimea and annexed it. Said that part of Ukraine was now part of Russia. And then it has been a few more years since the actual invasion of other major parts of Ukraine. During this time, we've gone through 4 presidential terms, 3 presidents. It started in the Obama era, it moved to the Trump era, and then the Biden era, and now we're back to the Trump 2 era. This is the longest war in Europe since World War I. It's longer than World War II by a long way. It's actually longer than World War I. And Americans have shifted their opinion on what our role should be, on what they think about what has been happening there. Let me start in the Obama era and catch us up pretty quick, and then we can talk about what's been happening just in the last week. Again, 2014 is when the Crimea invasion happened. A lot of activity around that at the time. In 2015, Gallup polling Americans, 49% considered Russia's military power a critical threat to the world. That was up substantially from the year before at 32%. 54%, though, opposed sending weapons to Ukraine to fight pro-Russian rebels. This, again, was not the government of Ukraine, but pro-Russian rebels in the eastern part of Ukraine. Then Trump became president in 2017, early 2017. There was the famous Helsinki summit where he and Vladimir Putin met. And then because of all that happened around Ukraine, both in the election and after, that was the basis of the first impeachment by the House for abuse of power, and alleged that he withheld military aid from Ukraine unless Ukraine would announce that it was investigating Joe Biden. The Senate did not convict him, so he was impeached but not convicted. At the time, so this is in 2017, a Pew Global analysis showed that Americans were significantly less confident in Putin than Trump. Only 23% of U.S. adults said they had confidence in Vladimir Putin to do the right thing in the world, and 57% of Americans viewed Ukraine favorably. So this was a little bit up from the number of people who thought that we should not be sending arms to the rebels in Ukraine. Finally, in the Biden era, there was the invasion. So we're now 3.5 years past the actual invasion of large parts of Ukraine. A lot of aid was approved from the U.S. to send to the Ukrainian military, and public opinion at the time in March of 2022, so this was just after the invasion, 42% said the U.S. should provide more support to Ukraine. 32% said the support was about right. 7% said too much. There was a pretty equal view among Republicans and Democrats. 51% of Republicans, 50% of Democrats equally viewed Russia's invasion as a major threat. That has all changed, and that's where we find ourselves now, where there's a much bigger partisan split among views of Ukraine. And we have a president who has met with Putin and gave him the red carpet, but then met with Zelensky, and they seem to have a really good meeting. Where do we stand? Are Americans right to maybe be flummoxed and confused a bit by what they're thinking about Ukraine based on what's been happening, especially in this administration?
I would say yes. And I would think that the past week was probably, can you have the height of the confusion? Yeah, you can. It was the height of the confusion because it looked like when Trump met with Putin, and obviously their relationship is, different folks have different takes on what's really goes on, and it seems to always be a backstory when they meet. And like you said, Jay, that there seemed to be, the red carpet literally went out, and, he drove him around, and, there was just a major symbolic stuff going on there. The flyover, people all probably saw that. And then at the White House, an unprecedented meeting, 48 hours after the Putin gathering, or roughly, and you had, every conceivable leader from Europe almost there. And I can't remember that large a lineup. And it certainly was different than when Zelensky met last time, when that just fell apart. And this time, it wasn't just that he wore a suit. I think it was that the dance had been set, that it was going to be a nice welcoming, and it was just a totally different gathering. And I think public opinion. I mean, I saw some numbers that YouGov put out this morning, and to talk about divided views. Increasing military aid to Ukraine on our part, 32%, decreased or eliminated 27%. So if you want to say it's fairly even, it is fairly even. And now that's where we are right now. I mean, it's back and forth. Barb, what's your take on all this?
Yeah, well, I think not only have we had the confusion of the different meetings this week, but then we have the continued, drone attacks by Russia on Ukraine as well. So on what seems to be the eve of a deal, an escalation of the drone attacks on the energy infrastructure in Ukraine. But, regarding the polling data, I think one of the things that I found really interesting on looking at data over the last decade is it sort of follows the polarization that we have seen in our politics on just about every issue.
Yeah.
So, if you, are, Republican, leaning Republican, have confidence in President Trump, you certainly have more confidence in Russian President Putin. You are more wary of Ukraine. If you are on the opposite side of those questions, you are very supportive of Ukraine and much more wary of Russia. So it seems that it has kind of followed that polarization that we have had in our politics over the last decade. I think one thing that has, although changed somewhat, but is often significantly mediated as well, is that Americans, I think as a whole, are pretty wary, about, boots on the ground.
Yeah.
There has been, a movement towards support for military aid, both lethal and, humanitarian. But I think that there is certainly the consensus that it is not our war. And so I think that, if we want to look at things that have also be consistent over time, that is certainly one of them. I mean, I think I'm probably as confused as the rest of the public as to, what we might see if we had a crystal ball, because I think that, certainly Trump has been working to get both Putin and Zelensky in the same room, so to speak, and then perhaps the triumvirate meeting with him as well. But given the U.S.'s inconsistent policy, I don't see, as Trump kind of promised on, day one, this would be resolved. And it just seems to be getting more complicated.
One of the numbers in that YouGov survey that you mentioned, Lee, that I think is interesting is that, and this just came out as we record today on Wednesday, August 20th, this just came out this morning, 68% of Americans say their preferred outcome for this is that Russia controls none of the Ukrainian territory. Yeah. That has been Vladimir Putin hasn't moved a bit on that. Now, it's negotiations, right? If you ever get to negotiations, you don't start with by saying, oh yeah, no, I'll give that back. I understand that. But at the same time, that does stand out to me that 7 in 10 Americans are seeing this framed in the way that European governments and NATO have framed it, and certainly the way the Biden administration framed it. Trump has not framed it that way. This week, he said, he said a lot of different things, but one of the things he said is, oh, well, there's going to have to be some land switching, and, that's good. Yeah. And Marco Rubio went on the Sunday shows and said, well, that's water under the bridge, essentially. So I think it is interesting that 7 in 10 Americans are feeling a specific way that is not necessarily aligned with the current administration.
Well, there's a sense that, and where's the fake news and where's the reality? There's a sense, accurately so, that, Putin was the initiator of this, although the White House is periodically kind of trying to back off that and put the blame on Zelensky, particularly after that last meeting in the White House, the earlier one. I'm struck also, there seems to be the stopping point right now seems to be whether there's a ceasefire as a precondition of having some kind of negotiation, or is that not on the table? And, so there, obviously that's a big deal, but I have to harken back. I remember for several years, there were no discussions over, settlement in the war in Vietnam because of South Vietnam and the Viet Cong and North Vietnam. The shape of the table, would it be basically two groups or three? And that sort of kept the war going. Yeah, I don't know if that really was the reason, but symbolically that was. I think we're right there. If one side says land is a part of, land transfer has to be part of it, and the other guy says and they say ceasefire is a precondition for negotiation, and then the other guy says not. I'd like to think we're kind of getting closer, but maybe we're just spinning the wheels in the mud here.
I did have a question. I'm interested in the opinion that each of you have on this, which is, I think this has been a very visible example of Trump's ability as president to negotiate peace in the world. And although I think we do see some division, certainly in terms of partisanship with regard to, Putin and Zelensky, but how much of a concern is it if Ukraine is really seen as having lost the war to Russia? Do you think Trump has a cost in American public opinion and, certainly European opinion, and how he might deal with that?
And that's a really good question. Let me flip that around and ask the same question in a slightly different way, which is there really a cost in modern America to any politician in our super partisan, way that we are now, to something that's not the economy? Yeah, foreign affairs have always been a bit of a backseat in America. We are an inward-looking country compared to many others, and we have lots of reasons for that. Oceans protect us, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But historically, it's not foreign affairs that drive how we really feel about our leaders. And I just wonder in this case, if Russia was able to succeed in an invasion and taking territory, that has not happened since World War II in Europe, and it really hasn't happened in much of the world. The United Nations was designed to stop that from ever happening. Mm-hmm. But does that really reflect on a Donald Trump, for instance, in America? In the rest of the world, probably, but in America? Or is it, what are the price of eggs?
Well, I think you guys were talking about it before. I mean, I think President Trump knows probably instinctively, if not politically, that the boots on the ground are where you draw the line. And so, he talked initially after the last meeting in the White House, there was a sense that he might be involved in military, sort of saying, yeah, we're kind of, and then he said, no, we might provide air support or such. And I think that's a very fine, that is a distinction without a difference. I mean, I think, so Donald Trump knows, I think, that you can't cross that line and that without taking a cost to public opinion. Now, clearly his agenda is domestic. That's where he talked about during the campaign. And yet there's been a lot of kind of like dismissing international things. This was, as Barb said, this would take a day, the Middle East, maybe 2 days. Then we got involved with Mexico and Canada. That was 3 days. There's been a lot of international skirmishes politically, but if he draws the line and gets us involved in a direct sense more than we are with just aid. Aid's not going to make a huge difference in his public opinion beyond the economy. So people give aid, they don't give aid, as long as he doesn't look like he's getting too enmeshed. And I think that's where people draw the line.
Well, if you feel like you never have enough time, you aren't alone. In fact, about 8 in 10 working Americans in 2015 identified with that feeling. This phenomenon, rather, is known as time poverty. Why does it occur, and who is most susceptible to it? Well, we are very lucky today to be joined by Dr. Cassie Holmes, who coined the definition of time poverty. Dr. Holmes is a professor at UCLA Anderson School of Management, and we welcome her here today.
Thanks for having me.
It's truly our pleasure. So let's start with that definition, Dr. Holmes. What exactly is time poverty?
Yeah, as you said, time poverty is the acute feeling of having too much to do and not enough time to do it. So it is subjective. It's a feeling. And it's important to recognize the subjectivity to it, because it's not like you can just look at how someone spends the hours of their days to assess their sense of time strain and not having enough time. And it's also helpful to understand because recognizing the factors that contribute to it so that we can offset it. And I'm sure we will talk about the contributors as well as some of the sort of consequences of it.
Since you brought that up, what are some of the leading factors to time poverty?
Yeah, so perhaps not surprisingly, how we spend our day does influence it to some extent. So we see that people who spend more time in paid work feel more time poor. People who spend more hours of their day in childcare feel more time poor. We see that commuting is a significant contributor. But what's interesting is that when you pull out within this broader category of housework, childcare, and time taking care of the house, you actually see that housework itself is not a significant contributor. Now, if you look at demographic relationships, so because of the role of work and childcare, you see that people who work for pay, whether they're fully employed, self-employed, whether they are students working, or whether they work in the home to take care of the folks in their home, you see that those who work do feel more time poor than those who don't. You also see that there is a gender effect. So women tend to feel more time poor than men. And actually, that effect is even bigger among men and women who do not work for pay. You see that there's actually not a significant relationship with financial well-being. So how much money you have is unrelated to how time poor people feel. You see the role of parenting as being a significant factor. So folks who have kids in the house, so particularly having kids under the age of 4, having kids under the age of 18, feel more time poor. But what's interesting is that people who have kids who are out of the house, that is, kids over 18 who are empty nesters, you actually see that they feel like they have a whole lot of time. And actually, I forgot to mention retirees. The groups that feel like they have a lot of time, and we can even talk about the sort of other side of the spectrum of having too little time, but then there is such thing as our work has found too much time. Retirees and empty nesters feel like they have a whole lot of time.
I wonder how much that has to do with you go from time poverty almost instantaneously upon retirement to too much time and you think it's going to be great. And then it's like, wait, I've got too much time on my hands. One of the things we found in looking at data is one of the questions we had was, so is this getting worse? You know, whether it's because of technology or the demands of work or whatever it is. And there was a study conducted by Dr. Ashley Wilhans at Harvard in 2015 and found about 80% of Americans reported feeling they never had enough time. And that was up nearly 10 points from a similar survey in 2012, so only 3 years prior, that showed 70%. But the actual work, so work hours are recorded, right? And the actual work hours in 2024 of Americans, the average U.S. worker full-time was 42.9 hours per week. That's actually down from 44.1 hours the year before. So it's kind of weird. We're working fewer hours, at least the empirical evidence shows that, but we're feeling like we're more stressed. Is that the nature of work? Or like you suggested, does it have so much to do with what's happening outside of work and what's happening in the home as well?
I think it has to do with what people feel like is on their plate and all those things that they feel like they should and could be doing. So that does one of those things that we feel like we must do is work if there's others that are so relying on us. Childcare, that's, I think, why that's one of those ways of spending time that contribute to it. But then you have these more sort of harder to measure things of like what fills our thoughts of what is expected of us. And so I have a hypothesis, and I don't have very clean data yet to support this, but I think that there is a role of social media and amount of time we spend on screens that increases in our smartphones that allow us to do any and everything all of the time. With that ability, it increases our sense of, oh my gosh, maybe I should be doing something at every moment, of maybe I can be doing something. And with this increased efficiency that comes from these technologies, that also increases our expectations of ourselves for how much we should be doing and how much we should be producing within the same amount of time, which can absolutely, as we said, the nature of time poverty is absolutely subjective. And so when there are these sort of even unseen but experienced demands on our time, that can contribute to our sense of time strain.
I mean, Mary and I have never had a Slack outside of business hours, so I'm not sure we know what you're talking about.
It's almost like the hamster wheel has been accelerated. And so with that, the effects of time poverty seem to be great. So can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, and it's really important to recognize that, because not only is time poverty a pervasive issue, but its effects are negative and they are far-reaching. So research shows that when we feel time poor, it makes us less healthy. So we are less likely to spend time exercising. We sleep less than perhaps we should. Not our research, but other research has shown that people delay going to the doctor because they don't feel like they have the time to go to the doctor. And they eat fast food because it's fast, not because it's healthy. There's also, I have some work that shows that it has negative effects on our sense of confidence and self-efficacy, making us feel like we are less able to accomplish what we set out to do. And then there's, of course, the emotional effects of it, that when we feel time poor, it makes us feel less happy during our days. And actually, even in a bigger effect, is higher levels of negative emotion like stress, anxiety, and worry, and lower levels of satisfaction in life. And also, one of the big contributors, of course, to satisfaction in life and happiness are our relationships. And we find correlational data suggesting that when people feel time poor, it also makes them feel less connected and more lonely. And our research suggests that one of the culprits of that is that actually when we feel time poor, we're less likely to slow down and help others out. We hurry through our time, even with those individuals who are so important to us in our lives.
So are there any obvious solutions to this? Because I look at the world. So Mary and I work in the same place. I don't think our workplace is terrifically different from many other white-collar jobs, where, again, it spills into non-work hours thanks or at the fault of communication. We've got families, we've got the pressures, we've got commutes. Mary's got a historic commute. Even in LA, her 2-hour commute would be fairly extraordinary.
Yes.
I wonder, are there any, what have you discovered that give people solutions short of quitting their jobs and, working from home on a farm or something?
Yeah. And actually, the answer is not to quit your job. And that's what propelled some of my research in this, was like, oh my gosh, feeling extremely time poor as a working parent with a partner who also works. I was like, maybe the singular solution is to quit everything. And that is not the case, because in our research, we found that there's a sort of negative quadratic relationship. So an upside down U shape between the amount of available time people have and their life satisfaction and happiness, suggesting that yes, people with too little time do feel less happy. Those are the time poor. But as we already talked about with those empty nesters, retirees, we actually also see that people with too much time also feel less happy and satisfied with their lives because of that lacking sense of purpose. So the answer is not to quit everything. And in fact, our data suggests that there's a sort of sweet spot that if you can just get to having about 2 hours of discretionary time in the day, that actually you see it level out, and there's not a relationship between the amount of available time and satisfaction. Now, I will also say, though, going back to the subjectivity of this experience of time poverty and also the role of self-efficacy and energy, is that if you actually protect and carve out time for those things that are truly satisfying, that fuel you, whether through social connection, whether through allowing you to feel sort of a sense of productivity or achieving towards your purpose, those activities can actually make you feel like you have more time. It lessens that sense of strain. We even have some data that shows that if people, despite the fact that when we feel time poor, we tend to sort of hoard our time and not spend it on others, we found that actually if people were to spend 15 minutes helping someone out, it makes them feel like they have more time than had they spent that 15 minutes on themselves. And it's by increasing that sense of efficacy, it makes you realize, you know what, actually I can accomplish quite a bit and meet something meaningful with the time that I have, which gives you that sense of being able to achieve what you set out to do. But we could talk about this forever, as I do in my work and my course, of how do we spend our time to feel that sense of satisfaction with the time that we have. But I think that the clear answers are not to quit everything and to be really intentional when you're spending those times on those sources of fulfillment and joy and energy, because that can carry over and to fuel your sense of confidence and fulfillment with your time overall.
This is certainly a fascinating topic. Dr. Cassie Holmes, professor at UCLA Anderson School of Management, we thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to chat.
Okay, we have an unusual fun fact today because we have a guest. And if you're checking it on the screen, you can find that guest. Or if you're listening, you'll hear that guest. It's the long-awaited Chris DeVizio Poll Hub appearance. Chris is a super student who's been involved in lots of Marist Poll stuff. And today it is, drum roll, the 20th birthday special. You should know, Chris, that I'm closer to 120 than I am to 20, but that's a whole different matter. All right, well, let us go ahead then, because today is National Teddy Bear Day, and it's a survey which finds that more than half of adult Americans still have their teddy bear from childhood. Let's take a look at some of the data, as is our wont. There was a poll which was done, and I should point out that it was done by a Build-A-Bear workshop, which kind of normally we would be worried about a poll being done by someone who has an invested interest in the results. But given this, and given it's your birthday, Chris, we'll go past that. Okay. So a majority across generations, more than half of all respondents surveyed still own a stuffed animal.
From their childhood. Lee.
From their childhood, and 40% of these respondents sleep with a stuffed animal.
Oh
by their
no,
side.
I don't do that. But this is Toy Bear. I was equally as creative as a child as I am now. So this is Toy Bear.
All right. Well, we're going to get to that part in a second. Then 56% of respondents have owned and held on to their favorite stuffed animals, stuffed bears, more than 2 decades. Well, we know that with you. Additionally, more than 70% said they plan to keep their bear forever. And then, Barbara, you can chime in on this. 30% of respondents said it gives you a feeling of comfort when you think about the stuffed animal. And then 22%, it's the memory of it all. And the stuffed animal's appearance is 19%. Although, that's quite an appearance there. And the
here, Toy Bear, Toy Bear's missing an eye. And like you, Lee, he kind of has a bald spot on top. So he has not aged terribly well. Although I think he probably had, more of these problems, decades ago. So I don't know if it's about the Toy Bear aging process or not.
Well, let me introduce Freddie here. Freddie was not a bear, obviously. It's, I guess, a frog. I can't really, looks like Kermit a little bit, maybe related. And Freddie was given to me by some students on a trip to Washington in the early 1980s. So Freddie is well into his 40s, and that's why he's a little, shows
pale.
A little wear.
He's a little pale for a frog.
A little pale. He does talk, but he accompanied us on the trip to Washington, and we didn't bring him into any of the seminars, but he was always in the van that we were at. So, Chris, this is Freddie back in the limelight after almost 5 decades. Quite happy about that. Mary, you have something to say about this?
I was just going to ask you, Chris, do you have a teddy bear?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I suspect this may all be about that.
I do have a teddy bear. It's not from my childhood. It's, relatively new. Cassidy got it last year or 2 years ago for my birthday. Crass Bearman.
Yeah.
Usually he wears a suit, but I can't find that. So
wow. Well, it's your birthday, so he's in his birthday suit.
Exactly.
Today.
Exactly.
Good line. Good line.
But I mean, I suppose I still have,
Chris, why is he suitless?
the suit, it's like it's Velcro, so it always comes off and it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable to wear. It falls off. So yeah.
Well, Chris, I think you're wearing that suit. I think you're wearing the suit of the bear that Cassidy held up when I first met
Yeah.
you in New
In New
Hampshire.
Hampshire. You're right. You're
The
right.
red tie and the
It is my favorite suit. It's the one that fits me the best because it's the newest. But yeah, I did wear it in New Hampshire.
Do any of these bears do any imitations? So that's a whole different matter. Tommy, what do you make of all this? I'm somewhat perplexed.
So I lost my bear when I was moving to Florida. It was like this little.
Oh no!
It was a hedgehog. He was like this big, and he also lost an eye. But I do have some like squishmallows in New York, and I have one right here. I gave
wow.
it. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm. I gave this one to my dog for her birthday, and as you could tell, she sleeps on it all the time, so it's like super flat.
That's
That's kind of the point of the Squishmallow.
Yeah, I liked. They're good to sleep with.
Yeah. Mary, you did not bring what you could have, but what would we have been seeing had you done this?
Well, there are two. One is my childhood teddy bear that my aunt got for me for Christmas when I was probably about like 9 years old. I can't remember.
Mhm.
And it was all white, and needless to say, it's no longer all white. But I had that for a very long time. I still have it, but it's at my mom's house. But what I was going to bring, if I wasn't leaving so early in the morning, would have been a stuffed animal, a stuffed dog that my kid got for me for Mother's Day. And somehow it wound up from my room into their room, and I had to steal it back after I was packing up some stuff for them.
Yeah, that's really not nice. You give somebody
Oh, and what kind of dog stuffy is it?
You know what? I couldn't tell you exactly. It looks probably closest to a husky, but with a little gray in it.
Okay.
And a purple and white handkerchief or neckerchief, because they know that purple is my favorite color. So
That's very nice. I didn't know your favorite color was purple, as is Nancy, my wife's. Chris, what words of wisdom do you want to impart now that you have changed the 10 digit and this is historic? I mean, I think it's an historic day.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I mean, I listen every week, and it's great to be finally. Although I don't like the sound of my own voice, it's great to hear me on the podcast when this gets released. But words of wisdom, I don't know. I would encourage everyone to keep listening to Poll Hub. I mean, keep listening to Poll Hub. That's what I would say.
Well, it was a commercial statement.
You're 2 decades old now.
I
You're
know.
2 decades old.
I think the wisdom kicks in post grad. I don't think I have much wisdom to give right now.
maybe not even then. Trust me.
No, I would think if you had it, you'd already have it. I think you do.
Well,
I think you do. I've had you in class. I think there's a lot of wisdom.
Okay.
happy
Thank you,
happy
everybody.
birthday,
Thank
Chris.
you.
Chris, happy birthday. But before we let you go, what is your favorite Poll Hub segment that you've listened to?
I always like the fun fact because I think it's super
Is that
interesting.
because Lee hosts it and
Are you
he's
in my
a teacher?
classes?
I'm in both of your classes this semester.
Well, that's why I know. And so I think, given that I'm sort of the leader of fun facts, I suspect this has a political motive on your part.
No, I do always
that
like the
you
fun fact.
identify that, which is okay. I appreciate it. Well, now you can say with authority that you have, in fact, on your birthday, participated in a fun fact. And you never know what next year will bring. Because that would be 21, and that is another big year. You're really hitting all the crossing all the I's, T's, hitting the I's, crossing the T's, whatever you do with that. Anyway, but we wish you all happy birthday.
Well, thank you.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist University in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Neil Viswanathan, Hunter Petro, and AJ Gambino.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review.
Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them at us at Marist Poll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub.
And with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.